GrowCFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using GrowCFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net. Hello and welcome to the GrowCFO show. Today, I've got a really interesting guest with me, Georgia Wilson. Georgia's a CFO at Together Group, but Georgia's been around GrowCFO ever since we set the business up back in 2000. And Georgia's got quite an interesting story to tell. So, Georgia, welcome to the GrowCFO show.
Thank you, Kevin. It's an honor and privilege to be here. I'm glad I'm finally here after lots of talking about when I could find the time. It's an honor and privilege.
I think I've been trying to get you on this podcast for the last 3 years.
I agree with that. I agree.
Now, anybody listening will have spotted an accent there. Georgia, you're from Grenada.
Yes, I am.
Tell me about that.
Well, Grenada being the spice island of the Caribbean is one way to put it. Of late, we're talking about being pure Grenada, which basically means we're leaning on our ESG credentials. But I was born and bred on the island and moved over to the UK in 2006 to read my master's degree at the UCL. And then I went on to Big Four to Deloitte in the grad program to become an accountant.
Brilliant, brilliant. So that must have been a culture change from nice, warm, laid-back Grenada into wet, miserable London. How did you go?
It was. Kevin, you're not selling England at the moment. Absolutely, it was a huge change. I remember having to walk from my campus. So the campus, UCL, is a city campus, right? With the halls spread all across central London. And I had a 20-minute walk from my halls to my lectures. I remember when I first joined, I thought I could drive over. I thought, I'll catch a bus or I'll drive over from one to the next. Only to realize when you're going through from Bloomsbury to where my lectures were, I needed to walk. Regardless of snow, rain, everything else, it did take some acclimatizing.
Yeah, I bet it did. But wow, out of a master's degree into audit at Deloitte, but then you made a decision that it wasn't the accountancy profession, it was industry. So what drove you in that direction?
I think with everybody moving over, some people, as soon as they qualified, like 6 weeks to go to the qualification date, they already resigned. I wasn't aware. So one by one, when we got to 3 years in, people were leaving. And I felt like I was 8 years in and it must be something else out there that everybody else had, most of the people in my year had rushed off to do. So I was enjoying Deloitte. I was progressing. I had taken a key client to the FTSE 250. I'd become a corporate governance specialist as well. So I was feeling fulfilled with that. I didn't want my career to be one of not having seen the other side, just in case it could add some more value and round out my skill set a bit further. And then what then became the crisis moment was being on maternity leave with my second child. My first child, I have a son and a daughter, and my son was 4 years old, and we were walking, and he said to me, he really enjoyed having more of me at home. And I reflected on that and I thought, well, if the right role comes up, maybe in an industry role, I might be able to see the other side professionally, as well as have more time for my family. And within a few days from that comment, that moment of reflection, an internal recruiter at Shell called me. And he said he had come across my profile on LinkedIn and wanted to know whether I was interested in a role with them. Right away, I said, look, I'm on mat leave, looking to go back to Deloitte. We're having great conversations. Can Shell support me even better than that? And he promised me that it could. So in we went with the conversations, and that led to my first industry role.
Brilliant. So at what point, Georgia, did you decide that CFO was the path that you wanted to follow?
I think that's a brilliant question. And honestly, the answer is resting in my coach at the time. So when I went to Shell, I didn't anticipate that it would be another cultural clash, another cultural change. I thought I'd navigated the Grenada to England one. I'd just about survived it. I'd bedded down. I was doing well at Deloitte, and I took it for granted I'll be able to just transfer over to Shell and do more of the same. But Shell is such a big beast in terms of its age, its size. I mean, it's FTSE 1. It's Anglo and Dutch. So a lot of acclimatizing again. And in doing that, I joined the Experienced Hires Network. So again, for those who are listening on the call, I think I'd like to just point out the key nuggets here, which would be realizing when you might be a bit out of your depth and reaching out to your established network or joining new networks or creating new networks. So I'd made a friend who was also ex-Deloitte at Shell. So we hadn't known each other at Deloitte. We met at Shell. And she mentioned the Experience Hire Network and how much she was gaining from that. So I was curious and I said, well, I'll come along to one. And in the first session I attended with her, I met a coach who Shell had hired to support the experience hires because Shell had recognized that coming in as an experience hire was a huge cultural shift all the various employees across the company, not just the accountants. So I met a lot of lonely souls who were learning the Shell way. And I met a coach who got me, who understood me. We began to work together. And over a couple of years of explaining my career goals, where I thought I was going, building targets for me to reach and surpass, one day he sat me down and he said to me, I'm preparing you to become a CFO. And I was shocked.
Brilliant. But shocked.
Shocked, because let's go back to the first question you asked me, which is, you're a girl coming from Grenada. If I'm in Grenada, of course I'll become CFO. I mean, that's not a question. But you think coming into the UK, it's a different landscape. You hear so much, you see so much, the glass ceiling, and it's tricky for women, the intersectionality between being a woman and being Black. I'm a mom. I had disclosed. Some people would not disclose you're on maternity leave if they're being headhunted. I'd explained that I was a new mom. I joined Shell when my daughter was about 10 months old. So me being CFO was just really another huge paradigm shift for me mentally. It did the question did challenge me because straight away I thought, if I'm in Grenada, nobody needs to tell me who I could be. I know who I could be. So why am I limiting myself here? Part of it is when you look around, who do you see in that CFO office, on that chair, behind that desk? And if the image is not reflecting who you are, just my personality alone, there's a clash already because I'm that sunny, beamy person. I love people, and CFOs are known for being pretty serious. So it was shocking. I thought he was just making me laugh. He said he was very serious. And my journey towards CFO started. It started on the way between Shell and Centrica.
Yeah. So, Georgia, you've raised that minority issue already. No, you're not the gender that's perhaps associated with the role most. You're not the skin color that's associated with the role most. As that journey progressed, did those things get in the way?
I would say that with everything else, when you're different, you will always ask yourself if certain things got in the way. I wouldn't be human if I didn't ask myself that. But the reality is, here am I 10 years later. I am a CFO and I haven't had to change anything about myself to get there. So the journey might take a bit longer. You might have to be a bit more strategic about it, but it can be done. It can be done right here in the UK. So it's a very positive story where I'm concerned. And I have met others like me who look like me, who have entered into this area, who are making a huge difference in their organizations. And I think there is more to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Roll it on. Bring it on. Definitely. Now, I firmly believe that the more diversity you can have in the top levels of organizations, the more innovative we become, the more creative we become, and it's for the general good of everybody. And one of the issues that I see, I've explored this on a couple of podcasts with David Horn. We were talking in particular about founders and how female founders and how minority groups, besides female founders, are generally not accepted in the same way in fundraising rounds as a white male team. And it is completely wrong. Well, why should there be any difference? There should not.
I agree with you. This is definitely an area that needs to shift. I have sat in meetings with private equity teams and groups working very closely with various investment banks, and I'm the only woman in the room. And the comments and so on, they don't mean it in any way, but even the jokes are so gender biased and so based on the male being the breadwinner, keeping a happy wife at home. And the more we attend those meetings and we bring our voice, we bring our stories, we come as humans and as people, the more that will shift. Because I must say that in those meetings, I always got the attention of the gentlemen. They always stop to listen, to laugh of themselves as well, and to get the humor about it. So I'm glad to see that people are willing to change if they're confronted with something that's different, that works.
And Giorgio, with that personality of yours bubbling through, I can hardly see this not working. And I know before we started the recording, I said to you, Giorgio, you smile at absolutely everything. What happens when you take bad news to the rest of the board?
So my CEO had to warn me a little bit about that. We were chatting. We were at the London Stock Exchange at the LSEG building at St. Paul's. We were having a glass of wine after a conference on how to prepare for an IPO. And he said to me, I want everyone to fear you. But how can they fear you when you're always smiling? And I said, well, am I? He said, yes, even for really bad news, you're smiling. So people will either think you're crazy or they think you're a psychopath. And I said, oh,
the smiling assassin.
No, it really made me ponder though, because I stood there and I thought to myself, I've lived through a hurricane that killed so many people in Grenada in 2020, in 2004, and 80% of all buildings were destroyed. I know how to come back from the brink, and nothing is as bad as loss of life. And as long as we're saying that the numbers are down today, hopefully the message is also, and what's our strategy to turn the ship around and to get performance back on track? And so if you're too serious, who is going to get behind you?
Yeah, quite. It's about taking people on a journey and having them believe in where you're taking them. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But Georgia, we first met, I think it must have been right in the very early stages of GrowCFO back in 2020. Now,
Yes.
you weren't quite a CFO at that stage. Tell me about what happened around that time.
Around that time. So Dan messaged me on LinkedIn and he said, hello, I'm ex Deloitte. I'm setting up GrowCFO. Do you want to be a part of it? And I thought to myself, oh, GrowCFO. That sounds interesting. I don't think I've ever heard of something like this before. And as you know, because I've already shared in some of my coach, he had already a few years before that kind of incubated the idea. So I was ready for that kind of message. And I said, sure, I will come along. I will join. And I was happy to join. I heard you speak, Kevin. You were able to host a number of webinars I found to be very interesting. But then we went into lockdown. I was preparing my son for 11 plus. And I was moving house. So I did the responsible thing. I messaged Dan. I said that I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to drop off because of all these family commitments, but give me a year and I'll be back on. And then a year later, around spring of 21, I rejoined. I began to listen to the webinars again. And Dan approached me and he said to me, let's have a call. Let's talk about the future CFO program. Both Catherine and I realized that you share a lot on those calls. Would like you to consider joining our future CFO program. And again, I thought, ooh, CFO keeps popping up a lot in my space. What does that mean?
Yes. Yes, I find that when you're meant to do something, for some reason, it keeps popping up in conversation and you just can't avoid it.
Absolutely, because then I began to think about it. I spoke to Global Switch about it, and unbeknownst to Dan, at Global Switch, where I was head of finance and looking after the data centers in the UK, my group director for the UK, more or less the managing director for the data centers, he began to refer to me as his CFO. And I could see he was grooming me to become one day. And I thought, okay, I'll talk to Global Switch about potentially sponsoring me to join the future CFO program. And again, that's a message for people who are joining the call, who are listening in. Don't be afraid to ask for a corporate sponsorship because it shows your organization that you're serious about your career, you're serious about what you want to do next. And you also get a chance to see if they're also serious about you. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't invest in yourself and pay from your pocket. Of course not. I've also over the years paid for coaching from my pocket as well. But it's good to gauge the temperature where you are. And whilst chatting with Global Switch about it, Together Group came along within weeks and they said, we'd like you to become our first CFO. And so I moved from future CFO to an outright CFO within that same year. And it was very much not something I had ever predicted at the start of the year at all.
Wow. So it all happened out of the blue. Phone call from a headhunter that you weren't expecting ends up with you winning the job as CFO at Together Group.
Yes.
So, Georgia, that must be another culture shock. You're head of finance, doing very nicely in your previous job. Out of the blue, you've moved and you're now CFO. How did that feel?
I think easily one of the biggest culture shocks I've ever had. If the theme of the conversation is about culture shocks, I think get ready for it. Anybody who is stepping into becoming a first-time CFO, you might as well try other things that are on your list to see what it feels like to be out of your comfort zone, because you'll need to know how to be resilient, how to get back into the saddle once you take on that first role. And I think every time you change roles as CFO, that kind of question comes back. Some call it imposter syndrome, but there is an adjustment that has to happen. And for me, it was an adjustment around sector because I'd spent my days in industry in the industrialized sector. I'd worked at Shell, I'd worked at Centrica, which holds British gas. I'd then gone on to Global Switch, which is data centers. Together Group is about marketing. And it's marketing agencies looking after the brands. So you're not even on the brand side, you're servicing the brands. Yeah. So that's already a big change.
Because every one of those roles, you've mentioned somebody who produces a physical product. And suddenly you've got this airy-fairy thing called marketing.
Yes. And it's not any old marketing. It's marketing to luxury and lifestyle products. So when you think about fashion and you think about LVMH, for example, on the luxury side, or you think about Sarah, which is very aspirational and fast and trendy, our agencies look after those. We have agencies that help to launch Kim Kardashian's Kim's brand, again, which is a very now featuring and majoring in one particular product, which is shapewear, and doing that very well with various tones for various skin colors. We bring in inclusivity into the conversation. So that's one of the areas that our agencies look after. And then another area is just producing reports and bespoke research on the future of luxury across all kinds of sectors, whether it's motor cars, whether it's working from home, whether it's China as a global market or the Middle East as a global market and so on. So agencies do all sorts. And this was just a new territory for me altogether. And then maybe what was the first thing that really got my attention was that Together Group was a startup. And when they contacted me, they had nothing in their portfolio as yet.
Right. So hang on a minute. You're out of this big industry or big company background in Deloitte, pretty darn huge. Shell, number one in the FTSE. Centrica, major in the oil and gas industry. And hang on a minute. You go into a startup. You've never been a CFO before, and you've got no industry experience.
Yes.
What particular skills did they recruit you for?
They recruited me. They were very sure about what they wanted me to bring to the table, which I did bring. And I had to remind myself of that all the way through the process. Because believe you me, when they offered me the role, I was scared to accept it. I was very scared. I was very delighted. I was thrilled, but I was really scared as well. And I remember talking to my husband about it, and he said, come on, accept it. They've offered you, so you must be able to do the things that they need you to do. And I said, well, all the things you've said, Kevin. And of course, what if they go down as well? Because they're a startup. What if nothing ever gets accomplished? And I've left my comfortable job in COVID to try something new. But what did they want me to bring? So I had specialized in corporate governance during my audit days at Deloitte. And they knew that they were going to do a buy and build, a rapid scale up from no assets in the portfolio to a good number of assets within 4 to 5 months in 2021, and to build on that in the next few years. So they want somebody who could really put that best in class framework in place and have them ready for some sort of exit, ideally an IPO, without having to redo everything when they got ready for that exit. They wanted to be able to build to perfection from day one. And I knew in my heart I could do that because I'd seen what good looked like across all the companies I'd been fortunate enough to work for.
Brilliant. But I can understand where you're stepping out of your comfort zone here, because you're in a brand new industry, you're in a brand new environment, being a startup environment. And on top of that, you're preparing to move towards an exit transaction, which presumably you'd never had experience of before.
I had prepared a client for IPO when I was at Deloitte and taken them all the way through to the FTSE 250. But apart from that, I didn't need to have any exit experience by virtue of the companies I'd worked for. When I was at Shell, Shell had acquired BG, but again, that's a different level of scale. And I was looking at the trading part, absorbing the trading part. It's nowhere close to the corporate finance side. So that was totally green. And I think in a way it helped me that I didn't know what I was in for. I think if I knew in great granularity the things that I did not know that I should know, maybe I would have chickened out.
Okay. The things that you didn't know that maybe you should have known, how did you then approach that? What was it that got you into a position that you accomplished all of those things?
Well, I think the first thing was I eventually accepted the role, and we made the announcement on LinkedIn that I was going to join. And within a couple of months of making that announcement, sadly, I lost my dad. And so I had to go back to square one. He was maybe my closest champion, the one who, I mean, along with my mom, the one who really believed in me and who had sent me off to the UK and so proud of what I was doing here. And so I had to go back home and sort everything out. At that point in time, I felt as if we hadn't made that public announcement, I would have walked away from taking on that change.
If you've made that announcement, so you've got to do it.
I felt like I needed to honor the announcements I'd made. And I needed to, all the things I needed to learn how to do, I needed to figure out how to do that. And if any, the worst case, it would help me to deal with my grief because it would give me other things to do. So it was the right decision. It was the right call. So I came back around 9th of October. I joined the role a week later, 18th of October. And one of the key things about Together Group at the time was how my CEO and the co-founders were so willing to train me and teach me. And they had the patience to explain everything. And as we acquired our businesses, the founders of those agencies, as they got involved and they joined the group, they took their time to explain what exactly their agency did. And there's one thing I learned was no two marketing agencies are the same. Even if they're using the exact language, they're looking after the same clients, you might think that they're all doing the same thing, but one is looking after the CMO, another one is maybe looking after the CEO, another one is looking after press and PR. And it's just, I've loved every part of it, but I've had to apply myself a lot. Listen, take notes, ask the questions early when everybody wants to answer the questions, and then begin to make the connections, do the reading outside of the meetings and outside of getting on with the day job, spending the weekend, getting into the board packs and just saturating myself with the brands and the fashion and the beauty and the lifestyle and everything else that screams luxury. And that's on top of the day job, because remember, the day job is being a CFO on the finance side and building a finance function from scratch and scaling that up. So it's multi-layered because a CFO is also responsible for performance, especially in the smaller groups. And to get that done, you need to understand the industry. You need to learn that as well.
Yeah. So building the finance function from scratch, what sort of team have you got now?
Group team of around 10 to 12 people, depending on whether we count the contractors or not. So in terms of the group, we've scaled from 0 million revenue to our last file accounts for 2023 showed that we were billing around 100 million a year.
Wow.
December 23. And then if we go on to December 24, Those numbers aren't out yet, but by just showing you how we've grown from 21 to 23, you could just imagine another scaling up again from 23 to 24. So
not telling us what the 24 results are, or we'll all be accused of insider trading.
we'll be finding those soon. So, when we think about how our numbers are growing, we are a multi-million, $100 million business in terms of revenue with strong EBITDA and strong cash generation, made up of 13 global marketing brands spreading from San Diego in the West and LA all the way over to Florida, all the way into New York, and then London, across Western Europe, so Paris and Milan and Lisbon, over to the far east. We're in Hong Kong, we're in Singapore, we're in Shanghai, we're in the Middle East, in Riyadh and Dubai, in Melbourne and Sydney. So it's a group, again, when I first met the founders, we were closing acquisition 1.
Yeah.
And 4 years later, we've closed 13 acquisitions, we've incubated brands. And so at the group team itself, I have now set up over time a director who looks after the integration and onboarding of the agencies, a director who looks after reporting, controlling, and the audits, the director who looks after tax, another who looks after treasury, and another who looks after FP&A. And then below them, they have 1 or 2 people or maybe loan functions. And it's a great team, a great team.
And that tells a story in itself that says, you as CFO can't be expected to know everything and be able to do everything. Get the team around you that complements you and brings the right skills into the business. And, oh boy, have you got to do that quickly in a fast-growing business like yours?
Yes. So the first 6 months, it was 3 of us at group, and we acquired the first 5 agencies in that time. And so the 3 of us, we were doing everything with the support of advisors. And then as we closed our next fundraise, and we had another 3 or 4 acquisitions in the pipeline to close with that fundraise, with covenants and so on to report on, we knew that size of 3 was never going to work. It was time to double the group team. And so every year, as we've grown through acquisition and incubation, we've taken a look at the group to see what other role we should hire. And we've really staged it and we've scaled it in line with the size of the group and the complexity of what the group needs from day to day.
Yeah. Georgia, we could talk about that all day. And I'd love to get you back on a podcast at another point in time where we just talk about how do you grow a finance function.
I'd love to do that.
That in itself is a really fascinating subject, and we could probably talk for a whole episode on that one. But now, coming back to you, that huge amount of growth that you must have had to go through from being head of finance to CFO in this company that is growing from 0 to 100 million. What external support did you have to help you through that?
I always say I wouldn't be a CFO today and still be in seat if it was not for GrowCFO.
Right. Tell me more about that.
I feel it was fortuitous the way in which Dan reached out to me at the time. Of course, I didn't know the plan for my life then, but I tapped into what he was saying. It was join, you'll meet other like-minded people. A year later, when he called to say, we think you'll be a CFO one day, I'll introduce you to Andrew Waters, who supports us from Xander. And he did do the introduction. And I thought my first CFO role would come through Andrew. It didn't, because within 2 weeks, Together Group was calling me. However, how to become a CFO and you've never done it before, then you reach to the toolkit that you have. So the toolkit I would have had would remembering what CFOs did when I audited them at Deloitte, remembering how CFOs came across when I worked for them across industry, and GrowCFO. Dan had already convinced me that he believed me and he knew I could do it. And all I had to do was go back to him to say, hey, Dan, I've had an offer out of nowhere. Where do we start? And the first thing he said was, well, why don't we elevate to the proper CFO program? And Catherine, you've heard her sharing already on the webinars, and she thinks a lot of you are just going to have in the future CFO program. Let me speak to her, maybe some one-to-ones with her as well. And so I started at Together October of 21. And I had 2 arrangements in place. One was to do one-to-one chats with Catherine Ideally monthly, but whenever I needed her, I would schedule a chat, and that was to last for about 6 months. And the other was to join the group of CFOs. Well, all CFOs already. I was a new kid on the block, and they were meeting once a month for about 6 months. And so it'll get a chance to hear what issues other CFOs are grappling with, and I could share what was on my mind, and they could, Chatham House rules, guide me. And anything else I needed to break down and think through, or I needed a bit more time to work through, I had Catherine for that. And coming back to the point where I said I had no idea, but the things I didn't know to know what the gap would be to have to close. When I reflect on that, I know for certain if I didn't have Grow CFO there at that time, I wouldn't be in the role today,
Right.
because I encountered so much that I needed to process, to put into some framework, to improve on, or to leverage, how to approach things, how to deal with founders. I hadn't worked with founders before. How to deal with creatives. I hadn't worked with creatives before. How to scale a finance function. What's the next hire? Every role you say you want, but how to go about it? And when there is no cash, how do you prioritize that? Should you really hire? And all, as we said, we can talk about all these topics, are topics in their own right. And all of those questions I could bring to the table as and when they cropped up, and get valuable counsel from Catherine and from other esteemed CFOs I'm very close to up to today.
So the CFO program that put you in touch with all of those other relatively new CFOs and the one-to-one mentoring from Catherine Clark were the things that made a real difference.
Huge difference.
Going forward from 2021 to 2025, where are you finding support now?
Exactly. So 2 years into the role, realized that my team was growing, and I was needing more and more for them to step up out of the comfort zone and not need me as much. And I also could see that I had future CFOs around me. One of the key things I pride myself on is in trying to ensure that my team get fulfilled and get a personal development that they're capable of creating and enjoying in the role, so that one day they'll become CFOs themselves, those that are minded and want to do that. And so I went to Dan and I said to Dan, my team, they're growing. We're becoming a more complex group. I could see areas in which they could benefit from some training and some support, just the same way I had. What do you have on offer for the team? And over the last few years, every year we've collaborated between Together Group and GrowCFO, pulling out the people who their line managers and I feel they're ready. First of all, you have to be ready for a CFO, a GrowCFO course. And then once you're ready, you have to be able to take that on and really bring that back into the workplace. It's a cycle.
Yeah.
And so just having a team that's stronger and bolder has been a great help to me. So when I think of, where do I turn to when I need some help? Increasingly, I could turn to my team when I need some help, because I'm making sure that they have the training and support that they need. And then what about myself as I've continued to evolve? Catherine and I, our relationship has grown even more. It has matured. So I'm no longer asking the basic rudimentary questions. It's a lot more of a nuanced conversation. So it's not about starting up the group now. It's about the governance if the group wants to still IPO. It's about what would exit look like for the founders who've come into a group, who've been with us for 5 years. They're at the end of their earning horizon. What potentially could that look like? So it's a lot more mature, the conversations that Catherine and I have. Dan and I have had our conversations as well, where Dan has said he'll look across his network to see and tap on to the resources, people who've done exits, who could then spend that time to talk to me as current CFOs who've done exits, to counsel me and support me. So the Grow CFO is very much about growth. The emphasis is on that. I am living proof and testimony of that experience with Dan and with Catherine, and also with you, Kevin. Thank you so much.
So what's next for Georgia Wilson?
Well, I've been asking myself that question this year. I think time will tell, and whatever is next, I'm open for it. I think I've learned now that a lot of exciting things can happen, unpredictable things as well. And if I were to decide what it could be, I might just limit myself. So I'm open to whatever comes my way.
Brilliant. Georgia, thank you so much for being this week's guest on the GrowCFO show.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure.